what basis is truth grounded? Is there a basis for the grounding of truth that goes beyond my mind? And I just don't think you can't live in a world where everyone gets to define their own truth. It just becomes, at some point, it becomes unlivable. Hi, friends. This is Scott Allen, president of the Disciple Nations Alliance, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences, the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance. As we prepare to launch my newest book, 10 Words to Heal Our Broken World, Restoring the True Meaning of Our Most Important Words, we wanted to go through each one of these 10 foundational words that are highlighted in the book, discussing their true meaning, as well as how they've been fundamentally redefined in our contemporary culture. Now, you might be asking, why do words matter? Well, it's because words and definitions shape the way we think and feel, and that in turn determines our choices and our actions. And that shapes the kind of culture that we live in, for better or for worse. And so, if you want to work for a positive change in culture, in society, it has to begin by restoring the true meaning of our most important words.
Hi, friends. Thank you for joining us today here on Ideas Have Consequences. My name is Luke, and I will be your host today, joined by my friend, boss, and former babysitter, Dwight Vogt. Dwight, thank you for joining.
You're welcome.
And this is the mini-series on the podcast here where we are introducing you to the new book that my dad, Scott Allen, just wrote. It's going to be out here in a couple months. It's coming out this fall. We are going to let you know about the actual release date very soon. We have we're just about to have that set. Just one more time, the name of the book is 10 Words to Heal Our Broken World, Restoring the Meaning of Our Most Important Words. And for those of you who are wondering, those 10 words are as follows: truth, human, sex, marriage, freedom, authority, justice, faith, beauty, and love. So over the next few weeks here on the podcast, we're going to just be walking through these words one by one. And as today is the first podcast where we're covering a word, we're going to start at the beginning with the word truth. So we are going to do our best today to unpack this word. In the book, Dad, you open every chapter by giving a brief definition of your best attempt at the true biblical definition of these words, and then you line that up with the hijacked and redefined definition that we often hear in our culture today. So just to start out today, Dad, why don't you just read us those two definitions a couple times so that we can get those on the table?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Luke. You know, it's fitting, I think, that we start with the word truth out of these 10 words because it really is the foundation of all of them. If there isn't such a thing as truth, then there is no such thing as a true definition of these words, which is what we're arguing for. There is a true definition. These words don't just mean whatever people want them to mean. There is a truthfulness to what it means to be human. There's a truthfulness to sexuality and to justice. And there's a truthfulness to truth as well. So we have to start there. Truth is the foundation of everything in some ways. And so here's the simple definition of truth. And it's kind of surprisingly simple, actually. It's truth is that which accords with or that corresponds with an objective reality or objective reality. So, truth is that which accords with objective reality. It's synonymous with fact. Something that is factual is truthful. Now, today, that has been redefined. And the way that I described the redefined definition is this way. Truth is an internal and a personal and a subjective sense of reality that exists only in the mind. Or you could expand that to the group, and you could say that truth is a social construct that's created to give advantage to a dominant group. So that's how I've redefined truth today. And I do think that second one, that redefinition, is the dominant understanding in our culture today.
Wow, thanks, Scott. Well, let's go back, though, and start with the true definition.
Sure.
You said it's that which comports with reality, that which accords with reality, fact.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty clear, but could you unpack that a bit? What are the key aspects of that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the key part of that definition is objective reality, okay? So truth has to be anchored to or linked to something that's objectively real. Without a sense of a real objective reality, then truth doesn't make any sense. And let me explain that a little bit. So, so what do I mean by objective reality? I don't want to get philosophical here because it's something that we deal with every day. I had this morning for breakfast eggs and toast. That in a sense is an objective reality, right? And so when I say I had eggs and toast for breakfast, I'm speaking truthfully, I'm speaking factually, I'm speaking of something that corresponds to an objective reality. So it's really that simple in some ways, and I don't want to over philosophize it. It really is that simple. So what is objective reality? You know, the eggs and toast I had for breakfast. It's really this world that exists around us. That's kind of in some ways the most basic fixed point of objective reality. It's the chair that I'm sitting on. It's the fingers and hands and body and mind that I have. These are things that exist whether I believe in them or not, if that makes sense. So, that I would start with that, Dwight, that this world around us is a fixed point of objective reality, regardless of whether we believe in it. So, for example, again, you could say, I'm going to just fly off the roof because I don't believe in gravity, right? And I'm just going to, when I jump off the roof, I'm going to fly around. And you can believe that. That can be, quote unquote, your truth. But if you do that, right, because we live in a real world that functions according to real laws and is designed in a way that doesn't really care about what we believe, you're going to fall to the ground, right? You're going to break a leg. So, and that points to the importance of truth. You know, that we need a knowledge of the real world in order to just function. We just can't function in this world without some basic knowledge of the way things are in reality. Mm-hmm. Let me stop there, and I'm sure you want to push on this a little bit, but
no, that leads to the second question, really, and that is, how does that create culture? Why is that necessary to create a culture, and what kind of culture will it create? Or you might want to give the opposite already, but just focus on the positive here. For example, I mean, I can think of, you just said I had eggs and toast for breakfast this morning. So you say, well, Dwight, would you give me eggs and toast? Bring it to my house tomorrow morning. And I think eggs and toast are pancakes and cornflakes. So I bring those to you, and you say, well, no, that's so we differed on objective reality. We differed on truth, and we had a breakdown. We had a function. Right. And I'm thinking, if you're logically talking about this with somebody who doesn't believe in objective truth, they have to finally agree with you that without objective truth, how can culture possibly function?
Yeah, you can't exactly, Dwight. You can't really function in the real world, especially socially, as you were talking about, in relationship with somebody else, if we all have our own little private worlds of my truth and your truth, and it's limited to what I believe in my mind, and you have a different understanding in your mind. You can't function socially that way. You can't. Everything breaks down. So again, this is not complicated, or it's something that we deal with every day. The social ramifications are immense.
Huge.
One of the things that I told my kids, Luke and the other kids, is when they were growing up is, and this was like the most basic rule in the house: you have to, tell me the truth. And why was that so important? Because if they lied all the time, then I couldn't trust them. Trust, right, is the glue that holds relationships together. You can't have a relationship with somebody that you don't trust. And you have to have a relationship built on trust. You have to be truthful. So, the social consequences are immense, right? And that's why you have to speak truthfully.
Yeah.
Tell me the truth. What's the truth? Yeah.
Thanks.
Before we go on, though, Dwight, I want to, I talk about how truth has to be tethered to objective reality, and I said that is this real world that we all live in, that exists regardless of what we believe about it or not. Gravity exists whether you believe in it or not. But I want to go beyond that, because biblically you have to, and not just biblically, but right, it begs the question, and this does get philosophical, but it's so important. Well, where did the world come from, right? What is that grounded in? Did it just emerge? Did it just happen as some kind of accident? Did it just appear out of nowhere, right? And these are really, really important questions, it turns out. And the answer is no, it doesn't just spring out of nothingness. Every effect must have a sufficient cause. And the world that we see around us, its design and purposefulness and beauty and intricacy and all of its laws, right? The way that we see this world around us, it points to something beyond it. It points to a designer, right? It points to God. And that's the point that the Apostle Paul made in Romans chapter 1. And he said this, he said, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature have been clearly seen, and they are understood from what he's made. So this world that truth is grounded in isn't just some accident, it's a creation, and it points to a creator in a way that, if we're honest, is clearly seen. And if you deny that, if you just say all of this intricacy and design and intelligent kind of information, all that exists, the beauty, it just kind of sprung into being, Paul says you're suppressing the truth, that's a suppression, a willful suppression of the truth. So it's no surprise that the Bible begins with these words, in the beginning, God, he's the ultimate ground of truth. God created the heavens and the earth. And the biblical God, he's not just like any God that's out there. He's not some impersonal cosmic force. He's not, a product of human imagination. He's not a fairy tale. He's not like the pagan gods that are unpredictable or deceitful or capricious. The God of the Bible is a God who is utterly truthful. In fact, God himself says in his revealed word to us that it's impossible for him to lie, which I think is really powerful. God cannot lie. It's beyond his ability, because he's utterly truthful. He can't be bribed. He can't be manipulated. He doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So I think Jordan Peterson recently has been saying this, that the very concept of truth has to be grounded in an understanding of God, right? Apart from that, it really does. It becomes untethered and it becomes relative. And this is why I think when Jesus came into the world, God in human flesh, he said, I am the truth, right? I'm God. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He said, for this purpose, this is from John 18:37, for this purpose, I always like that, for this purpose I was born. Oh, I'm tuned in now. Why were you born, Jesus? What was the purpose that you were born? Listen to what he says. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I came into the world to bear witness to the truth. And then he goes on and he says, everyone who is on the side of the truth listens to my voice. Wow, it's so powerful. So ultimately, truth has to be grounded in an objective reality, this world, but this world didn't spring out of nothingness. It was created by God, and God has a certain character, and God revealed himself in Christ, and when Christ came, he said, I'm the truth. If you're on the side of truth, you listen to my voice, because I always speak the truth. So this is so important, I think. I mean, at one level, truth is very simple. It's the egg and the toast I had for breakfast. At another level, it's got to be grounded in the person of Jesus Christ. So that's a lot, but let's go on and we'll go from there.
Yeah. I love your definition, Dad. Simple, it's easy to remember, that which accords with or corresponds with objective reality. As I read that, I'm wondering, so is truth then just a synonym for fact or reality? Can you just swap them around, or is there something more intrinsic about truth or more?
No, I think, Luke, they really are. I think they can be closely tied. I mean, some, people that are PhDs in philosophy would probably argue with me on that. But I think for average, everyday people like myself, we're really talking about the same thing. When we speak of truth, we're speaking of something that's factual, that's real, that's objectively real. Yeah.
But at the same time, truth is a person. It's Jesus, right?
Well, again, this is the grounding of truth, right? For there to be an objective reality, it has to be grounded. Think about this, Luke. Let's just assume Darwin was right? There is no God. Everything sprung into being by accident. There's no God out there. There's no angels. There's no demons. There's no spiritual reality. It's just matter in motion, and you're part of that matter. If that's your starting point, if that's your basic understanding of reality, then there can be no truth, right? Mm-hmm. Because truth just it makes no sense in that worldview.
It's constantly evolving. Because
it just
the world
changes.
Is evolving. If we evolve,
right, it's not
evolves.
tethered to anything. It's not grounded in anything. There's just it's almost a nonsensical concept, right? And yet that's where we're at today, because that Darwin's view is the accepted view. It's the taught view in schools. And so what people have done with truth is they haven't stopped talking about truth, but they've relativized. They've said it's just what I believe, right? It's what I believe. It's what you believe. So all that to say, Luke, it has to be grounded, and it has to be grounded even in something that goes beyond the physical world, the chair that I'm sitting in. It has to be grounded in something deeper, and that is, the Bible makes that very clear. That's God, the one who created everything, and that's Jesus Christ, ultimately, God in human flesh.
Yeah, I think of it as it's grounded in a person, but it's grounded in the author. It's grounded in the truth generator.
That's correct.
What actually created this? Well, it was the person who knew truth and created truth, and we see it. It's now around us.
Absolutely. The word author is really helpful here, Dwight, too, because when we think of an author who writes a book, he has a meaning that he gives to that book. He's got a message that he's trying to convey. That's the truth of that book, if you will. But once truth is relativized, then what the author intended to say doesn't matter. I can give whatever meaning I want to that text, right? And that's the kind of the postmodern deconstruction, if you will, that we're into today. It doesn't matter what, let's say, the authors of the Constitution intended when they wrote that document. I can give whatever meaning I want to that document. So, but if there really is an author,
that person had an intent.
Then that matters, right? That matters. What did he intend? And there is an author to everything, and that's God. Go ahead, Dwight. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I'm just talking over you, repeating what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So so there is an author, but what's cool about truth is you don't have to know the author to know truth. You don't have to be a Christian to know truth.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
You can still observe it, which is really cool. And that's what do they call that? Natural law, or
Scott, why is it helpful?
we all relate to the same real world, right? This it exists regardless of what we believe about it, and whether you're a Christian or not, we relate to the same world, right? So.
That said, Scott, why would you say it's helpful to know the author if you want to be a truth seeker?
It's
putting you on the spot.
This is really important. Modernism was based on the idea that truth is grounded in the physical world, right? This world, biological, chemical, material reality, right? But that's not enough, okay? Here's why, if that's all that exists is just biological, chemical, material reality, then again, we can't. How can anyone claim to know anything truthfully, right? It all becomes just a morass of subjectivism, It has to be grounded in something greater. And I'm not explaining this well. Maybe we can cut this part out, Luke.
I heard a guy who was not a Christian actually do a great job of explaining this, of why it matters at the end of the day to know the author. And he was looking at the way scientists look at science, and he was saying, you guys are doing it all wrong. Mm-hmm. So he said, he was talking about how this is in the creationist argument of how there is a creator that made the world, and because there's order in the world, it means there was an orderly creator at the beginning of it all, intelligent design. So this guy's not a Christian, and he says, what you guys essentially are doing, scientists, when you are looking at the world and trying to use science, but you're not acknowledging that there was a creator, is it's like looking at the English language for the first time, like a paragraph in a book. Mm-hmm. And scientists say, okay, so we have these markings on here, they're black ink, and they have some kind of order to them, and there's spaces between them, and I see these dots at the end of each sentence, and each sentence starts with a capital letter, so they're finding order in this paragraph. They're finding order, they're finding meaning. They maybe even start figuring out what the words mean, and they're like, wow, this is interesting. So that's science. But no one's asking, okay, but who actually wrote this in the first place? Why is there even ink on the paper?
Yeah, right.
And at the end of the day, all science, all facts, all truth leads back to an origin. And if you ask questions and you seek the answers, you will continue on this road of this truth-seeking road. And at the end of that road, there's a person. And if you're a very honest person, God's given us the mind, because we're made in his image, to actually go down that road. And eventually we will have to make a decision for ourselves. Do we want to submit to the author at the beginning, at the origin of this road, or do we want to reject him? And good scientists will ultimately end up asking that question, and they can answer it honestly, or they can choose to turn away from God in their own pride.
Yeah, that's so well said, Luke.
Sense?
I think
Okay.
you really nailed it right there. I can
think of one more argument.
Yeah, go ahead, Dwight.
As well, and that would be, I was reading in Psalms this morning, and basically God says if you, I don't remember the exact words, but basically if you seek me and you seek truth, I will help you find it.
Yeah.
And we see through a glass dimly now. The fact is, all of us, I mean, if you love life, you love truth, because truth will lead to life. And I'm thinking of even a person who's, you're trying to fix a Formula One race car, and you've never seen one before, and you're trying to figure it out. I mean, the best thing you can do is go find the builder of that car, the engine builder, and say, how does this thing work? What does it do? How does this? What's wrong with it here? And that person then will help you. And God actually offers his wisdom to us as the author of the universe and the creator of the universe. So there's a pragmatic reason to want to know the author
well
of
said,
truth.
Dwight. Well said. Yeah, you guys are bringing to my mind, the kind of how does science actually work if you're honest, And you have to have certain presuppositions in place even for science to work, which is the study of the material world, right? You have to believe that there's an order, a kind of a repeatable order or certain laws, right? Then the question is, where did they come from, right? Why would we expect order and laws in a random, chaotic universe of just matter and motion? We wouldn't expect that. So it points to a designer. But then even more fundamentally, how could we understand it, right? Why should we be expected to understand anything if our brains are just matter in motion, right? Why should I trust what you say is true about anything, So you have to have this understanding that somehow we are set apart from God's creation, and we can observe it and understand it and communicate with one another about it. And the only worldview that has those kind of groundings is the biblical worldview. It says, there's an order and a design to this created world because there's an author. God created it in an orderly and a designed way, and he created us in a unique way as image bearers of God to be able to kind of reason and think critically and carefully. He created us to be truth seekers so that we can know truth. Yeah. So you can't even have science or a study of the physical world apart from God. So I think what you guys are saying is really spot on. You have to, truth has to be grounded. It has to be grounded in the real world and even beyond that, where it came from, So well said.
Yeah, it's such an emboldening concept. It's such an exciting concept, such a freeing concept to know that as Christians, we are followers of the truth, which means that asking questions, that should be our favorite pastime. Seeking for answers, looking for people to really press us on our beliefs, that's great. Because we know that ultimately, if you ask questions and you truly seek out the truth, you're eventually going to end up at God. So we should not be afraid of science. We should not be afraid of data. We should not be afraid of what psychologists are figuring out if they're honest psychologists, because ultimately all of that is going to be pointing back to God. So we should be, the most accepting people on the planet of questions and challenges. We've said this quote 1,000 times on the podcast, but I'm going to say it again. This is J.I. Packer. He says, "The evangelical is not afraid of facts, nor is he afraid of thinking, for he knows that all truth is God's truth, and right reasoning cannot endanger sound faith. When confronted by those who take exception to Christianity, we must outthink them." So if you stand on truth, you essentially can't be moved. As long as you
you're
just
right.
follow
as
it to its
Christians,
origins.
as followers of Jesus, we should love the truth. Again, the truth ultimately is a person. It's Jesus Christ. We love the truth. We seek the truth. We want to know the truth, and we want to speak truthfully. It brings to, I think this is another important thing to say as we're talking about truth, is that when we're talking about God and the spiritual realm, we have to bring up the fact that there is an antithesis to the truth, right? God has an enemy, an opponent, Satan, right? This powerful fallen angel that God is more powerful, okay? But there is a conflict between God and Satan at the very foundation of all things and all of history, and Satan, this fallen angel, is described as the father of lies. So if God only speaks the truth, Satan, his opponent, constantly lies. And I think that's really important, that the great divide in the world, in reality, is this divide between God and Satan, and that's a divide between truth and lies. Let me just read to you what Jesus said about Satan. I think it's really powerful. Jesus said in John 10:10, "Satan was a murderer from the beginning, and he doesn't stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies." So you've got truth and you've got lies and deception, and behind those you've got personal spiritual beings, actually. You've got Jesus, the father of truth, and you've got Satan, the author of lies. And those have consequences in the real world. The truth builds. It builds flourishing relationships based on trust, and it builds healthy cultures. We'll get into this in a little bit. Lies always destroy, and that's always that's his goal. That's his purpose. It's destructive. He wants to tear down and destroy. Jesus said his purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy, and he does that through lies and deceptions. So, you definitely want to be, as a Christian, on the side of the truth. Okay, if you want to build a healthy, flourishing life, family, marriage, you name it,
try truth.
Society, nation, you've got to. The truth is the basic building block. It is the most fundamental building block. And if you veer away from that, you're playing right into the hands of Satan, and he's going to use lies and deception to destroy you and everything that you love.
Yep. It's always good to keep in mind the opposites. Truth will lead to reality. Reality leads to order.
Yep.
And the opposite of order is chaos. So you're going to have a chaotic society if you reject truth.
Yeah.
Speaking of chaotic societies, this word, truth, has been redefined. And at the beginning of this conversation, Dad, you read that redefinition to us. I think so far for our listeners, they're probably sitting there, and most of our listeners are Christians, and they're like, yeah, I agree with you guys so far. 31 minutes in, thumbs up, great job. But this word has been redefined, and I think it's such a destructive redefinition, and I don't think a lot of Christians understand how dangerous this redefinition is when played out. So why don't we just flesh that out real quick? Why don't you read the redefinition, Dad, and we can unpack why we really, really need to reject this definition and hold strongly to that true definition.
Yeah, so when people speak of truth today, what they mean by that is something that is, truth is internal, personal, and a subjective thing, a subjective sense of reality that exists only in your mind. Or, as I said earlier, it can be a social construction that a powerful group has created that it uses to give them advantage over weaker groups. So it becomes something. It's reduced to power, and we can talk about that in a second. So the key thing to understand about redefined truth is that it starts with the presupposition that there is no God. Okay, we live in a secular society today, largely secular. We've been taught, that God doesn't exist, that we're evolved, all there is matter in motion. So given those starting points, truth has been redefined as something that isn't linked to any objective reality. There's a denial of objective reality. Now reality is just strictly individual and personal. It's something that exists within you. So today people speak of my truth and your truth, right? Mm-hmm. And that's very common. And even Christians fall into this, when they say things like, well, what I believe, right? What I believe is that Jesus is my own personal Savior. And
that's essentially like saying my truth is that
it's
Jesus
the same thing
is,
as saying my truth. I know this may not be your truth. And so they're falling into this idea that truth is just relative. This is my belief. And so that's the way truth is understood in our society today. I think it's just really important. We could talk about the implications of that or the consequences of that. But
I before this podcast, I just Googled, famous movie quotes about truth because I wanted to get kind of that contemporary feel for what people are thinking about this word. And a quote popped up from a movie that I have no idea what this movie is, so I am not endorsing this movie whatsoever. It might be a terrible movie. But it's called I, Tonya, the movie. Margaret Robbie plays the main character, and in it she says this quote, which is very crass, so I'll try to clean it up. There's no such thing as truth. It's all bull. Everyone has their own truth, and life just does whatever the F it wants. So it's all random. Truth is random. There's no chaotic truth because there's no God. Yeah. And your own truth is all that matters. Follow your heart, be your truest version of yourself. These are all stickers we see on the back of people's cars today. And it's a very comfortable stance until you think about it for 10 minutes. But it's an easy stance, just like saying, well, I believe this. I remember, Dad, one time you called me out on that, and I was talking about the Bible, and I said, well, I believe this, but I'm okay if other people don't. And what I essentially was saying, the Bible is just another opinion. It's just another truth out there, and there's no such thing as one foundational truth. It's all options. And what a squishy view for someone to have. And you caught me on that, and it was a good heat check for me, because there is some things in life that are just you don't have to cover them up with that nice label of, oh, it's just mine. It's no, this is reality, and it's okay to be very clear and firm on that. And yet Christians don't like to do that because it sounds dogmatic. And just saying my truth is so much more comfortable. And I think that's why that is such a popular concept today is I don't think people truly believe it because, just believing my truth really doesn't work when it comes to something like getting your paycheck at the end of the month. You don't want your boss to say, well, my truth is you don't get paid this month. People don't really believe that, but it's so comfortable to say in any kind of discussion where there might be disagreement. You just say, oh, that's your truth. My truth is a little different, but, we'll go our separate ways. We're all cool,
Yeah, no, that's right. It's unlivable. As you were saying, Luke, in the real world, we still have to rely on people's word, the truthfulness of people's words, in everyday life in just simple ways. You were talking about paychecks. And yeah, this idea that truth is relative doesn't really work when we're talking about something that personal and meaningful to you, like what you get in your paycheck each month, right? We have to have some kind of external agreement about that goes beyond what I think or you think, and that we've got kind of written down, so to speak, and that's just one example. But yeah, no, today even though that's people, so we live in this weird place where people still have to live according to some basic level of truth, but philosophically they've become unmoored from the concept of kind of objective truth. And you said this idea of being true to yourself. Yourself is the only grounding of truth. What do I believe? And so being true to yourself then today has become this supreme value. And this, by the way, this isn't new, and I remember in 1987 when I was just out of college, I read a famous book by University of Chicago professor named Alan Bloom called The Closing of the American Mind. And that famous book, some of our older listeners might be familiar with that book. He started it with this sentence. He said, there's one thing that a professor can be absolutely certain of. Almost every student entering the university believes or says that he believes that truth is relative. In other words, there is no such thing as objective reality that grounds truth. Truth is relative to what you believe, what I believe. That was 1987. 3 decades ago. And so today, where are those students of Alan Bloom's from the University of Chicago he said they all, subscribe to that belief. They are now leading our universities and government and business and everywhere else. So this has become established in our culture, really sadly. So
I think the word belief is, I've been thinking while you guys are talking, and I'm thinking, well, what is belief and what is truth? And I'm thinking, the difference is we do say, I believe. And Jesus said, what's the work? What is the work we're called to do? It's to believe in him. And so we have this word belief, but the difference is I believe this is true. I believe that thing is true. I believe Jesus is true. And I will pursue that as truth. If it's ever so I'm like you say, Scott, I'm pursuing objective truth with my belief. And right now I believe that's true. But
we'll get into what you're talking about,
right.
Dwight, when we talk about the word faith and belief.
When we lose the idea of objective truth, then we can believe. Belief means nothing. It just means I have an opinion.
Well, it means that I'm free now to be whatever I want to be, and you see this particularly in the whole area of transgenderism, right? Like this has really become a social reality. We've denied the objective reality, the biological reality of male and female, and we've empowered people to say you can be whatever you want to be. And then here's the thing: you have to affirm that, right? You have to support that. That's what's understood today. So whatever you claim to be yourself has to be supported by other people around you. Go ahead.
But but the point is that there's a disconnection between what I believe and what is true. So as soon as
it's just a denial. It's a denial of truth at all, right? Is really what
basically
it is.
You say there's no longer an objective truth. Whatever I believe is true, so I am God.
I'm God.
And
exactly.
I make truth, and so I believe in what I make. Anyway, it gets really confusing.
Hey, there's an appeal there, isn't there? I mean, that's pretty powerful. I get to be God. I get to define reality, right?
That'd be scary.
So you can kind of almost see, and by the way, you can hear a voice behind that, and that voice is the voice of Satan. Well, I refuse to bow my knee to God. I'm going to define reality. And if you follow in the footsteps of Satan, that's what you say. I refuse to bow the knee to God. I define reality. I define who I am, what is real, what is true. And I'm going to then take the next step, and I'm going to force you, right, to affirm my own belief about it. So,
and we can trace that back to Genesis 3, where Satan said, "You will be like God."
You will be like God. Exactly. Right at the beginning of the Bible, Dwight. It's so good you brought that up. I mean, we see lies and deception, right? That's the first thing that causes Adam and Eve to go astray in the Garden of Eden, essentially, is a deception. Satan calls God's word into question, regarding the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God said, do not eat of that. You'll surely die. And Satan comes into the garden in the form of the serpent and said, did God really say? Right? Did he really say? I don't think he said, right? So he starts kind of twisting God's words. And then he dangles that out there in front of them. If you eat from that tree, you will be like God, right? You will be the definer of reality, of course. And all of this is meant and intended to enslave them, to destroy them, and that's the story of human history.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to read that false definition one more time. An internal, personal, and subjective sense of reality, what exists only in the mind.
Yeah.
A social construct created to advantage the dominant group.
Right. Yeah,
I can think of so many examples.
Oh, go ahead, Luke. Yeah,
so many examples of people that believe this, and it is hard. I've had conversations. I'm sure a lot of people listening have had conversations where they talk to someone who really does believe that it's an internal and personal, subjective sense of reality.
Oh yeah,
if they really have built their worldview around truth is just a personal idea of whatever's right for you, it's hard to have any functional, rational, reasonable, productive conversation with someone like that. Have you guys experienced that? I mean, I'm thinking of examples, left and right now. In fact, we could play devil's advocate here, and I could represent someone who believes that as best as I can, Dad, and we could have a little back and forth.
Yeah,
all right, devil's advocate. Right. Here we go. Okay, so you read your definition of truth, that is anchored in reality, and I say, okay, well, why do you get to define truth, for everyone else? Who gave you that right? What you're saying is just your truth, and that's very dogmatic of you to assume you can say what's true for everyone else. That's unloving, that's uncaring. I could even say that's bigoted. In my truth, I want to treat people well. In my truth, I allow people to follow their dreams. I just want people to be the truest version of themselves. And ultimately, that's probably going to lead people to happiness, and isn't that the purpose of life, to be happy and to follow truth to wherever you think happiness is.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think, again, I would come back to this simple kind of thing that we started with. So are you saying then, Luke, that we can't have any kind of agreed upon facts about anything? Is that the kind of world that you think we should live in? Where I say I had eggs and toast for breakfast, but Dwight says, no, that's not eggs and toast, that's actually waffles. And and we can never agree on that because we get to define truth ourselves. So are you saying that there is no kind of shared understanding of facts and reality in this world that we live in? And what does that mean for how we function together? What does it mean about your paycheck, for example?
But who gets to define what an egg is? For you, it could be an egg. For me, it could be a cornflake. At some point in history, someone just threw the label on that thing. So they're essentially the ones that got to define truth, and maybe I don't agree with that person because that's just their truth.
We can disagree on the word, but eventually, if we're going to communicate about that egg, we have to come up with a common word. So we can change the word egg, and we can call it a cornflake, but you and I had better agree that that's a cornflake. Because
but then wouldn't that just be a social construct that we all agree upon as humans?
Well, yes. We can say it's just something that we agree upon together. But again, this gets back to that earlier discussion about the grounding of truth, right? And we would have to push down that philosophical road of on what basis is truth grounded? Is there a basis for the grounding of truth that goes beyond my mind? And I just don't think you can't live in a world where everyone gets to define their own truth. It just becomes, at some point, it becomes unlivable, we're seeing right now an example of this, just one example, in the destruction of women's sports, because a lot of men are saying, my reality is I'm a woman, and I'm now going to enroll in women's sports, and they're destroying all the records, right, and wrecking all the, they're essentially destroying the sport, whatever the sport is, women's sport, and so that's just one example of how Luke, I thought this was a really terrific example that I saw several years ago. You guys saw this as well. It was a YouTube video, and it got millions of views. It was created by the State of Washington Family Research Institute, and the interviewer in this video goes on to the University of Washington in Seattle, the campus there, and he starts asking some questions to the students. And, to me, this is just so perfectly captured, the mindset that is prevalent in the culture today, especially amongst that age group, right, of students, anyone 30 and under. So he goes up to one of the students and he says, hey, if I told you, so this interviewer he's probably in his 30s, he's a white male guy. So he says to this student, if I told you I was a woman, what would your response be? And the student says, well, good for you. Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. Another student says. Yeah. So fine, you can, if you want to be a woman, good for you. Then he goes on and he says to another student, if I told you that I was Chinese, how would you respond? And that was a little harder for the student, you could tell, right? Than the woman one, because he's clearly Caucasian guy, European ancestry. He's like, but the student's still like, well, I might be a little surprised if you told me you were Chinese, but I would say good for you, right? And then he goes up to yet a third student, and he said something that was even harder. He says, hey, if I told you that I was 6'5" tall, this guy's probably 5'8", right? What would you say? And the student struggled even more with that one. But at the end of the day, felt kind of compelled to say, well, I would say that if you're not hindering anyone in society, if you're not causing any problems, if that's your truth, then I would say that's an okay thing. You can be 6'5". And then the interviewer says, but would you tell me I'm wrong? And the student answers, I don't feel like it's my place to say that someone is wrong or to draw any kind of lines or boundaries. That's kind of what you're getting at, Luke, there too. Like it's not my place to draw lines or boundaries around. Yeah. But okay, what's the problem? This is the way. Now these students have thoroughly absorbed this understanding of truth, this redefinition of truth. It's something subjective. It's created in your mind. So if you're a 5'8" Caucasian male, then if it's your reality to be a 6'4" Chinese woman, good for you. I can't say anything about that. You can't, that is delusional though. Let's just be honest. It's delusional. We cannot live in a world of delusion. Okay. Yeah. That's the bottom line, right?
Doesn't he go on to say, what if I was a female woman who's 6 foot something and 8 years old,
Oh yeah.
The 8 years old one, people really struggle with.
He kind of keeps asking harder and harder questions because he's pushing against, right, the male-female one. We've already kind of crossed that line. You can be whatever you want to be. You can create your own gender identity, and we have to affirm that, right? That's a big one in the society. But ethnicity, that's a harder one, right? Can I say I'm black if I have white skin? That's a little Can I say that I'm, 8 foot tall when I'm 3 foot tall or 4 foot tall, right? Those are harder ones.
Yeah.
But it's good that he pushed on those, because if truth really is, as it's been redefined, just something that's completely relative and in the mind, then of course you can say any of those things, right?
Yeah.
And
this
you have
actually
to be
happened.
You have to be affirmed in that.
This actually happened recently on a girls' high school swim team, and some dude who was probably in his 50s or 60s said, "I identify as a 15-year-old girl." Just a total creep,
Yeah, right.
And he actually joined the swim team and was in their pictures and
in their locker
swam
rooms.
in races.
There's real consequences for this kind of mass delusion. So this is what I would say to your friend, Luke. We have to, at the end of the day, live in the same real world and have some basic agreed upon facts that go beyond what you believe and I believe.
Yeah.
Or things are really going to break down, like real consequences, rape of young women or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I find with these things, when you use kind of simple things like breakfast cereal or whatever, your truth, my truth gets really philosophical and confusing. But I think with people having these discussions, don't be afraid to just use very extreme examples, because extreme examples oftentimes are just the clearest examples.
Right.
And that's where it gets very uncomfortable, because that black and white is a lot clearer in the extremes. So
here's where I think it really gets clear too, Luke. If there's really only two simple choices at the end of the day, either God defines truth or we define it. Okay? It's really that simple. But when I say we, meaning human beings, people, define truth, that doesn't really work in the real world. I don't get to create my own little reality and then force you to affirm my reality, right? Right? I can when I try to do that, what you see is that everything gets reduced to power. We're all trying to force each other into affirming our own understanding of reality. So everything gets reduced to power. So at the end of the day, truth then isn't what you or I believe, it's whatever the most powerful person says it is. So those are the two choices. Either truth is what God ultimately says it is, it's grounded in his reality, or if you don't like that, it's going to be grounded in whoever the person is that's able to amass the most power. Those are the options. And this is something that George Orwell saw super clearly, and I think it's so relevant, for the day that we're living in, because as we go down this post-truth world, that's what we're seeing in the world around us. We're just seeing people amassing power and then forcing other people through censorship and all sorts of techniques to affirm their preferred narratives or their view of reality. There's if you don't mind, there's a line in George Orwell's famous book, 1984, that just captures this so clearly. I came across it as I was writing my book, and I was really stunned, because he wrote this, I think, shortly after World War II, and just the insight that he had, even at that time, was really stunning. Yeah, the book 1984.
He wrote in 1948, I'm saying?
He wrote in 1948, exactly. Yeah. So the book kind of climaxes with this kind of inquisition that happens between the protagonist of the book, a guy named Winston Smith, who is somebody who's a truth seeker, and his torturer, this person named O'Brien. And O'Brien represents the group in power, or the party. Okay, in the book it's called The Party. And so O'Brien says to Winston during this inquisition, he says this: "Only the disciplined mind can see reality, Winston. You have to believe that you believe that reality is something objective, external, existing in its own right. You also believe the nature of reality is self-evident. When you delude yourself into thinking that you see something, you assume that everyone else sees the same thing as you. But I tell you, Winston, that reality is not external. Reality exists in the human mind and nowhere else. And not in the individual mind," this is the point that I'm making now, "which can make mistakes and in any case soon perishes, but only in the mind of the party, which is collective and immortal. Whatever the party holds to be true is truth. It is impossible to see reality except when looking through the eyes of the party. That is a fact that you have got to relearn, Winston. I just think that is so powerful and clear. He just nails it with that, right? You say reality is external, that we all can agree on it, that it's grounded in ultimate reality. No, it's not. It's subjective. It's grounded only in the mind, but not in the individual mind, only in the mind of the party, right? This is where it goes, right? The powerful are going to define reality. Those are the two choices. Either God does or the powerful, the party, if you will, right? And so what kind of world do you want to live in, I guess, is my final question on that. Go ahead,
that's inevitable.
That's inevitable.
It's inevitable. And I think that's one of the things we should be aware of today, that this move towards highly individualistic perception of reality and truth ultimately cannot, it leads to dissolution and disintegration.
It leads to tyranny.
And so you look at you look at the suicide rates of today among young people, and you look at the overdose levels of young people and people in general. And I think it's because there's this fragmentation that's taking place in our postmodern culture, where people,
that's right,
nobody can agree with anybody on anything, and so nobody connects to one another on anything. And there's
they don't know who they are.
Exactly.
Everything is just lies. It's lies and deception. We live in this world of deception now because there's no grounding for truth anymore. Yeah.
But Orwell looked down the road and said, where this leads is you can't. Society will disintegrate, and so the solution is for power to step
into chaos, right? If we all define our own truth.
And finally, the party steps in and says, "No, we will define reality.
I will impose the order, right?"
And then everybody goes,
"Truth is my truth, not your truth," right?
And at that point, you're so upset with life as it is that you go, "I'll take that. I'll take that order, even if it's a lie."
Yeah,
and that's the danger, that we'll take an order that's a lie, and then you have where Solzhenitsyn ended up. Writing true, live not by lies when he left.
Live not by lies. And so we had exactly, Solzhenitsyn brings, we live this way, not me personally, but we as a human race live this in the 20th century. I mean, communism essentially was what Orwell was writing about. They rejected God, they amassed power, we define reality, and we're going to force you, all of you, to affirm our reality. And we saw where that led to the gulags and literally millions of deaths. We saw it in Russia, we see it in China and Cambodia, and you name it. I mean, that's where it goes. Exactly right, Dwight. So those are the choices, right? Either God defines reality or you end up in something very much like that. And that's where, I hate to say it, ideas have consequences. That's where we are going. Okay, so then the question is, well, is there anything we can do about it? And maybe we can, Luke, we can move to some of that space there now.
Yeah, just one last thought before we move on. In using examples of this, it is really true that those are the only two options. Either you acknowledge that God exists and that he is the way, the truth, and the life and the foundation of truth, or if you don't and you reject truth, then the only way that you can have any formal order is through power holding that all together. Yeah, and you see God that throughout
people. And the most powerful people, exactly.
And you see that throughout all histories. Look at every civilization that's existed.
Yep.
You either devolve into authoritarian, dictatorships or tribalistic power wars, all of which are based on power, and whoever has the most power can control everyone else. 1984 is literally written for today's North Korea. Today in North Korea, they tell everyone in that entire country that there is no other countries in the world. There's just a bunch of savage people. You don't want to go out there. We're the only ones that are enlightened. They've rewritten history books. They've rewritten geography. It's pure power that's holding any semblance of formation in that country together. Yeah. Or you have democracies, and the only reason that the U.S. has worked for this long is because at its founding it said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, sacred, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator. There is a God, endowed by their creator with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you don't acknowledge the creator at the beginning of a democracy, it's going to fall apart. And that's why, as the U.S. has tried to spread democracy around the world, cultures that don't actually acknowledge that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, the democracies don't work there, and they eventually just devolve back to tyranny and authoritarian dictatorships. So that's just a good example of how, when these are lived out, it really just does devolve one way or the other. It can only go one way or the other.
Yeah, we'll get into that when we talk about the word freedom, even more, Luke, that these things that they're basic building blocks for democratic societies, for just basic human relationships. I think it's good to go and just, even at this point, say what is truth important for? What do we rely on it for? We take these things for granted, but we ought not to. We ought to come back to it. I already talked about how we rely on truth and truthfulness for basic human relationships. I can't have a relationship with you, Dwight, if you lie to me all the time. I can't trust you. And if I can't trust you, I can't have a relationship with you. And so, once truthfulness breaks down, relationships break down. People become isolated and lonely, as you said. It's this basic glue that holds everything together. So truth is essential for healthy relationships. Just imagine a society where, a family, a business, an organization, a marriage in which everyone lied all the time, right? You just couldn't trust anyone. Think how quickly things would fall apart, right? Truth is essential for justice, right? We don't want to take this for granted, right? Because justice is essentially a search for the truth of what actually happened. And that's why witnesses in a crime have to, they have to take a vow, essentially, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God, right? There has to be some kind of sense of, this is really important, this is sacred, you have to tell truth, because there's going to be consequences, guilt or innocence, prison time or not, depending on what you say. So justice is dependent on truth. Science is dependent on truth, right? You couldn't have you couldn't have science without an agreed upon set of natural laws that we all agree. It's not just what I think or you think, it's what's actually existing out there, right? Education. Universities can't exist without truth. Harvard, the founders of Harvard, when the Puritan founders, the committed Christian Puritan founders of Harvard, when they established that university, founded it upon the motto Veritas, which means truth. This is a place where we seek the truth. So apart from truth, there can't be any university. And I could go on, but suffice it to say that without that basic building block of truth, everything falls. You can't have a civilization. We just wouldn't have a civilization without it. So,
yeah. Ideas have consequences, and this false definition is very pervasive. At least where I live, and in many places around the world. I think a lot of our audience could agree with that. I even look at surveys from George Barna that he's doing at the Cultural Research Center, and even amongst Christians, this idea that there is no objective truth is very pervasive. Disturbingly pervasive. And
you can be a Christian and still believe in the subjectivity of truth, and a lot of Christians are, right? So
I don't know.
You can be a Christian in the sense that you can have a relationship with Jesus, but still have been kind of, you
have
a
still
lot
spout
of this,
the wrong definitions. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You can't have a fruitful Christian life, let's say. But yeah, no, you're right. It's probably arguable. But there's a lot of Christians who are postmodern in this sense. You're right, Luke.
Yeah, I think you can. Yeah, I agree with you. I think you can definitely be a Christian at heart, but still accidentally and unthoughtfully just re-say the common definitions that the world uses on words like truth. It's true for me. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, we're at a point now where it seems like we're on a slippery slope. How can we as Christians recover this true definition? We need to. So how do we do that? A lot of people think, it's just me. It's just my life. What can I really do to change society, culture, nations? Yeah. How do we do that?
A couple things. I'd like to just focus on two really simple things that I think we can do that are really practical. The first thing is it's simple, but it's also hard. We commit ourselves just individually to being truthful and to not lying and not deceiving and not shading the truth. Just in our everyday lives, we're just going to make a commitment to being as truthful as we can be. And that alone is going to take us a long way towards healing our societies, as if we just individually make that commitment. I struggle with this. It's, the flesh part of you, especially in times when there's consequences for truthfulness and you want to lie and shade the truth, right? It's still hard. I struggle with it. But at the end of the day, we have to just say, truth is that important that I will do my very best in God's strength to not lie, to not shade the truth, to be honest, completely honest and trustworthy with everyone. I was listening to Tucker Carlson, and whatever you think about him, I was impressed by one thing he said. He's a journalist, and he lived in this world of journalism, and he saw how journalism in the United States, this is another thing that can't exist without truth, was just being taken over by lies and spin and narratives, and it didn't really matter what was true anymore. It just mattered what the powerful narrative was, and the journalists existed to trumpet that narrative, right? And he was so sickened by that, you can't have journalism without truth, that he eventually got fired, and he kind of created his own journalistic enterprise. And he said, my foundation for this new enterprise is truth. I'm going to tell you, my listeners, as best I can, the truth about things, and I understand we see through a glass darkly, and we don't always see the truth completely, but to the best of my ability, I'm going to tell you the truth. And then he went on, and I thought this was powerful. He said, and I've committed myself to be as truthful as I can and to not lie. It starts with that basic commitment. So I would put that out there as how do we turn this around? It starts with you, right? And your own commitment to truthfulness. But I would put another thing out there too, Luke, and this is that we already are in some ways in George Orwell's 1984, where you've got powerful people that are telling you something that's not true, but they're saying this is the truth, you have to affirm it. And you see this again, especially in the transgender thing, where if you say no, there is an objective reality to male and female, you can expect some real negative consequences for that. You can expect to be possibly fired from your job, to be fined in some places. There's different jurisdictions and civic locations that actually have fines for you not affirming someone's chosen gender identity. So what do you do? And I think here you have to make a commitment to speaking the truth about things, even if there's strong social pressure not to, right? And not be cowed. You have to, this is what, what's his name? During the Cold War, the former prime minister of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, said, he called it living in the truth. You have to make a commitment to whatever lies the powerful regime is telling and are holding over you with all sorts of threats of jail and imprisonment and whatever it is, fines. You have to find it within yourself to not go along, because their lies, their powerful lies, only work to the degree that everyone is cowed into submission. Mm-hmm. And this is what Solzhenitsyn said, when he said, the truth is so powerful. One person telling the truth has the power to topple that whole regime of lies. So I think, this is, again, we have to have the courage within ourselves and to support each other to tell the truth about these things and say, no, I'm not, in love, I'm going to continue to say that there, male and female are realities. They're God-created realities. They're biological realities. I will not, and that's just one example, but it's an important one. So I think those are two things that we have to commit ourselves to doing in this time, just personally and socially. What are your thoughts, Dwight and Luke, on that?
Two thoughts.
What other ideas do you have too? I should ask. Yeah.
Two thoughts. One is just, you said, speaking the truth in love. We flip that out and say, oh yeah, we got to do it in love. But really, if you love somebody, really, really love them, you will want them to speak. You will want them to know the truth. You want them to live in truth, because delusion
truth and love are two sides
so
of the same
dangerous.
coin. Exactly. Yeah.
And I think of how many lives are being just really harmed these days because of lies, and young people, especially children, are taking it on they're getting hit hard because of lies.
Yes.
And if we love children, if we love families, we'll speak truth. The other thing is, I think I mentioned Solzhenitsyn's live not by lies. I looked at that again as I prepared for this podcast, and I was just dumbstruck by his basically, he's doing what you're doing, Scott. He's saying, okay, I'm leaving the Soviet Union. I'm being sent to the U.S. in exile because he's been released from the Gulag after all those years. They're saying you have to leave. And he releases this Live Not by Lies. It's a 3-page paper, and you should go Google it and find it and read it. It's just, here's what you do. Don't go to a meeting where you know they're going to distort the truth. Just don't go. Walk away.
Walk away.
And he has all these points.
Live in the truth.
Don't do this if you want to live in a truthful society. And it's really practical.
He is so worth listening to because he lived for years and paid the price of living in a society that was built on a foundation of lies, and it was imposed upon people by the powerful forces of the communist regime. And he saw how it destroyed everything, and it just gave him this deep commitment to the truth. So, yeah, he's really, really important. He's a prophetic
And he really
voice in
loved
our
his
day.
country. I mean, he still does. Well,
He wanted it to flourish and thrive, and he saw the lies destroying it.
Yeah.
So, absolutely.
Yeah, if you love something, you'll tell the truth. That's such a good takeaway. You mentioned Havel as well. Václav Havel. Havel. He said, if you speak the truth, you will preserve your humanity.
Yes.
I love that. The truth will set you free. We say that verse all the time, but if we truly believe that, then if we love someone, we would want them to live in freedom. We would want them to thrive in God's freedom. And to do that, you have to tell people the truth in the most loving way you can, as Jesus really did a great job of modeling for us, but you have to tell them the truth. You know, we read these stories in the Bible about, two of my favorite stories are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel in the lion's den. These are people that were faced with the choice: do you want to live in the truth, or do you want to follow the lie? And they chose heroically to live in the truth, and that resulted in consequences. But we love those stories because those people embodied in a heroic way that what living in truth looks like, and we love that. And nowadays, in our society, we also have been afforded that opportunity. Some of us will be afforded that sooner than later, and we can, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, stand up when everyone's bowing down.
Let's go back, Luke, just for a second. I think it's so powerful what you said there about Václav Havel. He said that when you live in the truth, what did he say? You gain, you regain.
You preserve your humanity.
You preserve your humanity. Let's talk about that just for a second, because I think people need to really understand what he meant by that. So he tells this famous story of a life under the communist regime, right, in the Czech Republic, and how, if you ran a small business, you were forced to put up a sign in the window of your business that, had a motto or slogan of the regime, right? That showed that you were compliant and would go along with the lies. And in this case, the sign said, "Workers of the world unite," or something like that, right? That you were safe, that you would go along with the lie, that you would tell the lie, and that you would be left alone, no problem. But in doing that, you were propping up this lie, this false regime, right, that was destroying people, and you were just a cog in the wheel, right? And at some point, that greengrocer, within himself, he makes a decision to take that sign down. And Václav Havel says two things happened at that point. Number one, he gives permission to other people to live in the truth, right, to take the sign down. Right? There's a contagion to the truthfulness here, right? And the courage to do that.
Yeah, courage is contagious.
Courage is contagious. He loses something by taking the sign down, meaning that the authorities are going to come in and they're going to confiscate his business. They may put him in prison. So he's going to lose something. He's going to pay a price for that. But then Havel says he gains something greater. This is, I think, what we don't see. He gains his humanity. He lives in the truth. This idea that to be a human, right, to be fully human is to not be an animal, to be cowed by some other powerful force, but to commit yourself to the truth no matter what. And that's to be fully human. So I think that's just so powerful what he said there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
that's connected to Genesis 1, where it says, why is that being fully human? Because we're made in the image of the truth
image
teller.
of God, who is truth.
Who is truth. So for us to be fully human is to be fully truthful.
Is to be as close to Christ and to God as we can be. And that means, truth. It's impossible to lie. That's, exactly, Dwight. Exactly.
No,
we regain to live in a lie is to be subhuman.
Yeah.
So, anyways. A couple things there for people to kind of chew on. I don't think it's too late in our post-truth culture, but we do have to come back to God. There does have to be a kind of a return to God in the church, in the society, for there to be a return to truth. Can we control that? No, but what we can control is what we can do, right, in our own lives. And so I want to encourage people in that way.
Yeah. Man, this is a hard one to wrap up. This has been a really fun discussion. For our listeners who are still with us, thank you so much for joining us for this a little bit long discussion today, but while we were having fun, and I hope you were enjoying it as well. In the future with these upcoming, the rest of the 9 words that we're going to be covering here, we'll try to keep it a little bit shorter for you guys, just for the sake of your time. But truth is it's a big one. So I'm glad that we went so in depth in this one. So again, this is part 1 of a 10-part series we're going to be doing here on the show. And by the way, these are not going to be exactly going to be a consecutive series, as we're still going to be sprinkling in some of our regular ideas have consequences styles interviews into the lineup over the next few months. But in the meantime, what you can do is keep an eye or an ear out, as we're really excited to start bringing you some of the new content and announcements pertaining to the upcoming book launch. Again, the title of the book is 10 Words to Heal Our Broken World, and I love this subtitle, Restoring the True Meanings of Our Most Important Words. Today we unpack truth. Next time we'll cover the critical word of human, and then down the list from there onto sex, marriage, freedom, authority, justice, faith, beauty, and love. So again, I hope you'll be able to join us for these upcoming episodes here in the series. And if you missed last week's introduction to the book episode, then make sure to give that one a listen. And please consider sending these episodes to your people, as it will help us build momentum for the upcoming book launch. Thanks again for joining us today. Make sure to visit the episode page for more information about the book and our ministry here at the Disciple Nations Alliance. And I hope to catch you next week here on Ideas Have Consequences, the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance.